In 1963, Sam and Joe Campisi were leading figures in the Dallas underworld.
Yes, Jack knew the Campisis and I've seen them together on numerous occasions. Jack ate out there at the Egyptian Lounge, and he'd come in, they'd shake his hand, sit down, and sometimes Joe Campisi would sit with him, and if I came in, or, you know, I'd sit with Jack Ruby and Joe Campisi, we all knew each other well.
The Campisis were lieutenants of Carlos Marcello, a Mafia boss who had reportedly talked of killing the president.
The Campisis did know Carlos Marcello because one day I was in Joe Campis's office and he called Carlos on the phone and I talked to Carlos on the phone.
"I'm the motherfucking boss around here," Carlos Marcello bellowed, his fist connecting with an FBI agent's jaw. Whether he knew the agent's identity was a matter of debate, but one thing was certain. In Louisiana, especially in New Orleans, Carlos Marcello knew everyone and everything. The agent who dared challenge Marcello got exactly what he sought. In a fiery outburst, Marcello shouted, "I'm the fucking boss here, nobody else," before savagely beating the agent in full view of the press, the public, and shocked onlookers, including his own brother. His brother leapt into action, embracing Marcello in a bear hug and eventually dragging him out of New Orleans airport. Carlos Marcello was a man who thrived behind closed doors, calculated and ruthless, never revealing his true nature to the outside world, only to his family and trusted allies. Few in Louisiana or even America fully grasped what he was capable of. People spoke of him in hushed tones, calling him the little big man of Louisiana. He was extremely dangerous, incredibly connected, and every threat against him only made him stronger. In 1966, Marcello was still under intense scrutiny from law enforcement. Rumors were no longer just linking him to organized crime, but also to the Kennedy assassination. Too many witnesses could connect Marcello to key figures like Jack Ruby, David Ferrie, Guy Banister, Dean Andrews, and Lee Harvey Oswald. Days before the assassination, Oswald was seen dining with Marcello's brother, who handed him an envelope of cash, as noted by an eyewitness passing through New Orleans. When this witness recognized Oswald from the papers and identified the restaurant, owned by Marcello's brother, to the FBI, the agents were stunned. The implications were immense. J. Edgar Hoover and Robert F. Kennedy conducted their investigations, uncovering surprising results. Either Castro orchestrated the hit, or it was organized crime, possibly with the CIA's involvement and support from influential industrialists. The assassination of a U.S. president was a conspiracy that extended far beyond a single crime boss in Louisiana. Marcello, a powerful figure, could not have acted alone. He would have needed backing from other influential people to carry out and cover up such a high-profile assassination. These figures promised Marcello that the assassination would never be traced back to him, as long as the right people were involved and the patsy was eliminated. Although all roads should have led to Dallas, they now pointed back to New Orleans, Marcello, and his criminal syndicate. In 1966, Marcello presided over one of the largest sit-downs in mob history. High-ranking members of the New York crime families, including Carlo Gambino, Tommy Eboli, Mike Miranda — Mike played the role of the mediator — Joe Colombo, as well as the Trafficante and Genovese families and the Southern Mafia's Anthony Carolla and Marcello faction, gathered to decide crucial matters. Unbeknownst to most attendees, Gambino and Marcello had already rigged the vote. Marcello would remain the boss of New Orleans, and a new successor would be appointed for the Lucchese crime family. The attendees included powerful figures like Carlo Gambino, Santo Trafficante Jr., Anthony Carolla, Frank Galliano, Joseph Gallo, Anthony Carrillo, Agnello Della Croce, Joseph Marcello, Dominic Alonghi, Tommy Eboli, Joseph Colombo, and the legendary Mike Miranda. Mike was one of the most legendary figures in Mafia history. Although part of the Genovese crime family, Miranda's influence extended far beyond. He played a pivotal role in arranging the Atlantic City Convention and was crucial before Maranzano's murder. Alongside Lansky, he traveled across America, securing the support of other mob bosses for Luciano's vision. Their approval allowed Luciano to present a new form of organized crime, focusing on business over disputes, peace over war, and profits over old-school traditions. Mike Miranda was a heavyweight in the world of organized crime, deeply connected throughout America. His influence spanned Chicago, New Orleans, the Midwest, Massachusetts, and, of course, New York. He mediated the tension between Luciano and Genovese, visiting Luciano in Italy multiple times to promote peace. Despite his efforts, a war between Luciano and Genovese's factions eventually erupted. Miranda was also closely linked with another influential mobster, Russell Bufalino. Miranda was instrumental in supporting Vito Genovese's takeover of the crime family after Costello's retirement. He participated in crucial discussions between Luciano, Costello, and Genovese, earning immense respect in the organized crime world. At the 1966 La Stella meeting, Miranda played a key role, mediating the interests of all attendees. Trusted to ensure fair hearings, he was the linchpin of the gathering. However, the meeting ended disastrously. All the men at that table, including Marcello, were arrested, sending shockwaves across America. Carlos Marcello, an untouchable mob boss in his own territories, found himself paraded in front of the press. This marked a significant shift in the world of organized crime. These men, accustomed to holding meetings in restaurants and celebrating business ventures, now faced a new reality. The era of untouchable mob bosses was coming to an end. Here is an article from around that time detailing the shocking events. The 13 mobsters, hauled in by a police raiding party at La Stella restaurant, 102-11 Queens Boulevard, had been summoned to give the formal nod to the man already chosen by those in a position to do the picking. The new kingpin of the Lucchese clan is slated to be Vincent John Rao, a longtime consultant to Lucchese and a stellar figure in Cosa Nostra. Rao is chosen to lead the gang's gambling, shylocking, labor racketeering, extortion, and murder operations. Like the board of directors of a large corporation, the 13 mobsters, several representing Cosa Nostra echelons in other parts of the country, came together to be informed about Rao's selection. Whether they ever got around to taking formal action before the police walked in is not known. Rao lives in Westchester and operates out of East Harlem. The Hoods, each held in a $100,000 bail as material witnesses, were subpoenaed to appear before the September Queens grand jury yesterday afternoon on orders of Queens District Attorney Nat Hentle. Strict security. After a night in the civil jail at 431 West 37th Street, they were taken in police vans and under stringent security regulations to the Queens Criminal Court building in Kew Gardens and herded to the 5th floor where the grand jury convenes. Although the 13 were originally hauled in on charges of consorting with known criminals, they were never booked on that charge or any criminal charge. Late yesterday afternoon, all 13 were released on a total of $1.3 million bail bonds. That started a new probe by the district attorney concerning the sources of the bail. Hentle said the grand jury would try to learn the current setup of the Cosa Nostra power dynasty. Only 2 testify. By the time the panel recessed at 4:10 in the afternoon, only 2 witnesses had testified. One was Antonio Taglierzio, who is connected with the restaurant. The identity of the second was not learned. The panel will resume its probe at 10 in the morning on Monday. In a lengthy news conference, at which Hentle fingered stacks of manila envelopes containing documents on mob rule in this country, and specifically on the East Coast, he termed the Forest Hills Conference more important than the Appalachian meeting of 1957, in which 62 important Mafia bosses participated. "We believe they have knowledge of specific major crimes committed in Queens," he added. "The mob empire has changed in the last few years. New families have sprung up like in New Jersey, and new facts must be elicited and brought out." Slaying of Canistrati Hentel said the 13 would be questioned about the slaying on Tuesday of Joseph Canistrati, 32, near the Long Island Expressway, just outside the city limits in Lake Success. Canistrati was a 348-pound lawyer who, according to a Hentel aide, dealt with the mob. The day before he was murdered, he was slated to appear for questioning by the Rackets Bureau of the Queens District Attorney's Office. He never showed up. Hentel said he wanted to learn what the Mafia chieftains knew specifically about Canistrati's land and stock dealings. Who fingered them? One thing troubling the mobsters, apparently even more than their nabbing, was who put the finger on them. Since the conference was super secret and held in a private basement room of the restaurant, they were trying to discover whether a stool pigeon did the job or whether they were raided as a result of continuing police surveillance. Hentel revealed he was considering the possibility of bringing before the grand jury Joseph Valachi, the Mafia soldier, who went before a Senate hearing and poured out a deluge of information about the Mafia combine. Valachi is now in solitary confinement in Chicago. Hentel also said that Assistant DA Albert Parante had been sent to Tioga County, upstate site of the infamous Appalachian Conclave, to get all the information available on that meeting. Parante is to talk with Tioga County DA Andrew Sidlecki and Judge Boldman, who was DA in 1957. A wide-ranging roster of law enforcement officials was busy all day yesterday checking files on the arrested mobsters and their activities. Asfiokim FBI agents included. The researchers included FBI agents, Treasury men, U.S. Marshals, and New York police officers from various specialized units. Hentel said he was in contact with officials in Louisiana, Florida, New Jersey, and other locations where some of the mobsters come from. Hentel described the arrested hoods as superior to those nailed at Appalachian. Hentel tabbed the conference as an historic first in Queens. But veteran observers of mob activities recalled that a top-level conference was held in a restaurant on Queens Boulevard in Rego Park about 2 years ago. That meeting place is about a mile away from the restaurant where the mobsters met Thursday. Future of top hoods. It was learned that one of the reasons for convening the Thursday meeting was to determine the future of certain top hoods now in trouble with the law. One of those believed under discussion was John Sonny Franzese, a noted Long Island hood now under federal indictment for masterminding bank robberies. As an intriguing aside not directly related to this article, it's worth mentioning that this man is the father of none other than Michael Franzese, the infamous mobster. Michael later turned his back on the criminal underworld in a sensational twist, creating a YouTube channel where he recounts his Mafia past. However, much of what he says is questionable, particularly his dubious claims that the Mafia never killed innocent people or engaged in drug operations. In stark contrast, his own father was deeply involved in prostitution, narcotics, and numerous murders across America. He was a well-respected and trusted figure, one of the rare few who served his prison sentence without turning informant. Yet the insidious nature of organized crime ultimately ravaged his entire family, shattering the lives of his sons and daughters. Among the mobsters brought in to testify before the grand jury were such top Mafia figures as Tommy Eboli, 51, high up in the Vito Genovese clan, Carlo Gambino, 59, Mike Miranda, 70, the so-called elder statesman of the Cosa Nostra who lives in Forest Hills, not far from La Stella restaurant, Joseph Colombo, 45, the boss of what formerly was the Profaci family in Brooklyn, and Carlos Marcello, 55, a racket boss in Louisiana and a one-time partner of Frank Costello. Hundreds of onlookers. All 13 were handcuffed as they stepped from 2 vans that drew up to the Queen's Courthouse at 1:43 in the afternoon. Hundreds of curious workers, defendants, lawyers, and members of the general public were kept behind police barricades as the mobsters were taken into the building. After initial efforts by the mobsters' lawyers to confer with their clients were turned aside, the attorneys were finally permitted to meet with them. Gangland's own personal day of infamy, of course, was the raid of November 14, 1957. On that day, the spotlight glared bright, and it has never ceased. 62 top leaders of the dreaded Mafia, now called Cosa Nostra, were bagged like cheap East Side crapshooters as they scurried through the woods trying to escape from state police, county cops, and federal agents. The crackdown came in the small upstate town of Appalachian in Tioga County, 190 miles from New York City. It seemed secluded. They had gathered from every part of the country to what they thought was a safe meeting place at the home of Joseph Barbara, a one-time Pittsburgh boss. All the big names, Vito Genovese, Joe Profaci, Joseph, Joe Bananas, Bonanno, Mike Miranda, Big John Ormento, Gerardo Catena, they were all there and were captured. The man who can take credit for focusing the glaring light was State Police Sergeant Edgar Croswell, now a captain. Croswell realized what he had and called for help. There followed trials and appeals. Some of the men were sent to jail, some beat the rap, and others had attention drawn to them, which resulted in their serving long terms for extortion, narcotics, gambling, and every other felony in the book. Then avoided big meetings. Since Appalachian, the crime syndicate has avoided large meetings. They have kept them small on many occasions, only top aides attending. Smaller groups, meeting and eating in lower Manhattan restaurants, have been grabbed by local authorities. Through the cooperation of federal authorities, the whereabouts and locations of these meetings have been kept under surveillance. The lesson learned from Appalachian was one not easily forgotten by law enforcement agencies. Harassment is the key. Federal and local authorities across the nation have followed this course. Harassment and the constant spotlight. Carlos Marcello returned to New Orleans fuming after his arrest and public humiliation in New York. Accustomed to moving through any place unbothered, he suspected an informer among his men. But Marcello's troubles didn't end there. Things only worsened upon landing at the New Orleans airport, especially in Louisiana. Despite his denials of involvement in organized crime, Marcello embodied the true gangster ethos. Real power operates in the shadows, unseen but ever present, corrupting whatever is good. When Carlos Marcello had to return to New York to answer for the original meeting at La Stella restaurant, where he was first arrested, he did so with brazen defiance. Accompanied by his lawyers, Marcello was unfazed, determined to flaunt his power. He returned to La Stella after the raid and arrest, only to reschedule the meeting. This bold move culminated in a famous photo capturing Santo Trafficante, Frank Logano, Carlos Marcello, and Jack Wasserman, and others members of organized crime, epitomizing Marcello's sense of untouchable authority. Returning to La Stella restaurant with his lawyers to finish that meal underscored his audacity. However, the consequences awaited him back in New Orleans. The press was there, and in a moment of heightened tension, Marcello swung a punch at an FBI agent. This marked a turning point. He was arrested and charged, but his sentence amounted to merely a few months in a facility that resembled a health retreat more than a prison. This episode showcases the genius of Carlos Marcello and the extent to which he had corrupted the entire system around him. Punching an FBI agent in public would ordinarily be a severe offense, yet for Marcello, it resulted in only a few months in a facility resembling a health retreat. Marcello was a genius at this covert manipulation. A few years earlier, Marcello's close associates were embroiled in whispers and speculation about their involvement in the Kennedy assassination. David Ferrie and Guy Banister, both of whom knew Lee Harvey Oswald, and Dean Andrews, who represented Oswald, were key figures in this clandestine network. Their connections and actions were discussed in hushed tones, adding to the mystique and intrigue surrounding Marcello's operations. But being caught in New York alongside Carlo Gambino and other bosses shattered this facade. It was game over for Marcello's carefully curated perception. Now he was at war with everything and everyone around him, a battle that still raged. Robert F. Kennedy was shocked that mobsters like Marcello felt brazen enough to meet in broad daylight without fear of repercussions. Following this meeting, Life magazine exposed a massive skim operation, revealing that these men were siphoning hundreds of millions from casinos in Las Vegas, the Bahamas, and other mob-controlled locations. Funded by Teamster pension money, these casinos were part of a serious racket, involving tax evasion and theft of taxpayer money. The skimmed funds were flown to banking havens like Switzerland, the Bahamas, and Panama, and then laundered back into the US as legitimate loans. Angelo Bruno, caught on a wiretap, arranged a $50 million loan for a business venture within half an hour, demonstrating the untouchable power of these mobsters. Meanwhile, Marcello faced the government's wrath. His prostitution rackets were raided, and his businesses manufacturing slot machines and casino equipment were targeted. The police and FBI planted evidence showing these machines rigged the odds in favor of the Mafia. Intended for illicit gambling across America, these machines became a liability. Marcello's racing wire, used to transmit results of horse races, dog races, and baseball games. Boxing matches, tennis matches, golf tournaments, motor racing, and political events, was allegedly tapped by the FBI. In response, Marcello shut down operations and arranged meetings across Houston, New Orleans, and Galveston. The FBI's unprecedented targeting of various crime families exposed Marcello as a mob boss. This article details the chaos that unfolded at New Orleans airport when Carlos Marcello returned from New York, marking a pivotal moment in his war with the government. New Orleans, October 1st, special, Cosa Nostra Biggie. Carlos Marcello was still digesting his share of yesterday's feast with other mobsters at La Stella restaurant in Queens when he arrived at the airport here. The sight that greeted him last night was enough to give him heartburn. Reporters and photographers were waiting to bombard him with questions and flashlights. "You got enough pictures? You got enough pictures?" he bawled. "Why don't you get out of here?" Then he swung a punch at one of his tormentors, who refused to leave him alone. The only trouble was that he chose FBI agent Patrick Collins Jr. as his target. Today he was arrested once more and charged with assaulting a federal agent. A squad of FBI agents escorted Marcello into a federal building for a hearing before U.S. Commissioner Fritz Windhorst, who set next Friday for a preliminary hearing and released the hood on $50,000 bail bond. Conviction carries a maximum 3-year prison sentence. Went back for more. Marcello, a boss of the Louisiana underworld, had been among 5 Cosa Nostra mobsters who feasted on Italian delicacies and wine at La Stella in Forest Hills, Queens yesterday. The cafe was the scene of the interrupted Little Appalachian conclave on September 22nd. With 12 other mobsters, he had been arrested then as a material witness and held on a $100,000 bail, which they all made within 24 hours. All are to return to face a Queens grand jury Monday. Carlos Marcello is led handcuffed into the U.S. Commissioner's office in New Orleans yesterday. With him is an FBI agent. Around this time, a certain district attorney closely connected to Carlos Marcello began facing significant issues. The FBI, now circling Marcello, understood that to reach the mob boss, they needed to tackle the political corruption shielding him. However, J. Edgar Hoover underestimated Marcello's willingness to use publicity to his advantage, even against public figures. The newspapers across America began uncovering the CIA's connections to Lee Harvey Oswald, especially his relationships with individuals like David Ferrie and Guy Banister. 6 months after the Kennedy assassination, David Ferrie was suddenly murdered. Guy Banister, directly linked to both Oswald and Marcello, also met a similar fate. To distance himself, Marcello immediately claimed that it was Banister who introduced him to Ferrie, portraying Ferrie as merely an extension of Banister. Banister, a trusted ally of J. Edgar Hoover in combating anti-communism and Castro sympathizers in New Orleans, kept an eye on the heavily armed far-right Cuban exiles. Though Banister had served the FBI for decades, by the mid-50s, he had become a private investigator with deep ties to organized crime, especially Marcello. David Ferrie died on February 27, 1967, at the age of 48. At this point, Jim Garrison made Ferrie the central figure of his investigation. Garrison intended to pin the Kennedy assassination on the CIA and their links to the FBI through Banister. He aimed to implicate Clay Shaw, embarrass the FBI, humiliate the CIA, and muddy the waters of the assassination investigation so thoroughly that only questions, not answers, would remain. Witnesses connected to organized crime, including strippers working for Jack Ruby's union and those who spoke of connections between Ruby, Banister, and Ferrie, began disappearing or were brutally murdered. Garrison elevated any narrative excluding organized crime, focusing instead on a CIA conspiracy. 3 men can keep a secret if 2 of them are dead, and in this case, anyone potentially linking the crime world to the assassination was being systematically eliminated. The cleanup operation had begun, and who better to manage it than the District Attorney of New Orleans? Jim Garrison, facing his own issues from the FBI regarding corruption, sought to elevate his career and become a political kingpin akin to the Huey Long family. Around the same time, Carlos Marcello was forced to restructure his entire real estate and criminal empire. The public exposure of the skim operation necessitated appointing new bosses and devising new methods of communication to avoid detection. Marcello's reorganization involved carefully selecting loyal and discreet individuals to lead various operations. These new bosses were tasked with maintaining the flow of illicit activities while staying under the radar of law enforcement. Marcello knew that the old ways were compromised, and he adapted swiftly to the changing landscape. The exposure of the skim, which revealed the siphoning of hundreds of millions from casinos, demanded a new level of secrecy and sophistication in operations. Marcello's genius lay in his ability to adapt and innovate, ensuring the continued success of his criminal enterprises despite the increasing scrutiny from the FBI and other law enforcement agencies. Eugene E. Delapara was a young ex-Marine working part-time at a New Orleans bar restaurant owned by Bernard Triegel, an associate of the infamous Marcello family. This establishment, the Launa restaurant, also known as Triegel's Bar, was strategically located near the Marcello's Town and Country Motel on Airline Highway. Triegel, well-connected and resourceful, had owned several bars and restaurants, including the notorious Triegel's Dreamland Bar Room. During the Kefauver hearings of 1951, Dreamland had been implicated as a Marcello-controlled venue. According to Aaron Cohn, the Marcellos had long backed Triegel's enterprises, as they were prime spots for their lucrative slot machines, pinball machines, and jukeboxes. Triegel also managed a horsebook linked to the Marcello gambling network and owned several racehorses. One day in April 1963, while Delapara was performing his duties at Triegel's restaurant, he overheard a chilling conversation. Triegel, speaking with 2 friends, Norman LeBlanc, a horse trainer, and someone they referred to as the Professor, discussed what appeared to be a plot to assassinate President Kennedy. They were examining an advertisement for a $12.95 foreign-made rifle in a detective magazine when Triegel ominously remarked, "This would be a nice rifle to buy to get the president. There is a price on the president's head and other members of the Kennedy family. Somebody will kill Kennedy when he comes down south." Delapara, who also worked part-time as a groom at New Orleans Fairgrounds racetrack, cared for one of Vincent Marcello's racehorses, and doubled as an informant for the FBI. According to a later FBI report, he was in regular contact with 3 special agents in the New Orleans office, providing them with reliable information on illegal gambling in the area. Delapara noted that Vincent Marcello, New Orleans racketeer, was a close friend and financial backer of Tragle's businesses, frequently traveling to Dallas, where Delapara believed Marcello owned a nightclub. In his eventual interview with the FBI, Eugene Delapara did not claim to have witnessed any direct plotting against President Kennedy that day in Tragle's restaurant. His allegation did not suggest that Tragle, Norman LeBlanc, or the professor were actively involved in orchestrating the president's assassination. Nonetheless, the conversation he overheard added a sinister layer to the already murky world of Marcello-associated enterprises. Delapara reported that Ben Tragle seemed to have heard there was a price on President Kennedy's head, and that somebody would kill Kennedy when he came south. From whom might Tragle have heard this ominous information? Given our knowledge of the Becker and Trafficante allegations, it seems reasonable to suspect that he heard it from one of the Marcellos, either from his backer, Vincent Marcello, or one of Vincent's brothers. This suspicion gained more credibility with additional information Delapara furnished to the FBI in February 1967, during New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison's reinvestigation of the Kennedy assassination. In this second version of his original allegation, Delapara recounted an incident at Tragle's bar. One day, while working, he observed Tony Marcello, a brother of Carlos Marcello, enter the bar to service the pinball machine. At a certain point, Tony Marcello announced to Ben Tragle and 3 or 4 others at the bar, "The word is out to get the Kennedy family." Subsequently, Ben Tragle repeated Tony Marcello's remark, using slightly different language, to some people in the back room. These revelations added a sinister layer to the already murky world of Marcello-associated enterprises, suggesting deeper ties to the chilling plot against President Kennedy. Around the same time, Eugene Delapara overheard Tony Marcello and Ben Tragle discussing a plot to assassinate President Kennedy. A visitor from Darien, Georgia, witnessed a suspicious event at the Town and Country restaurant in New Orleans. This visitor, later identified in FBI reports as informant SVT1, but occasionally referred to as Sumner, was on a business trip to Texas and Louisiana. One evening, he was invited to dinner at the Town and Country restaurant by 2 New Orleans business contacts, Salvador Pizza, involved in the seafood business, and Benny Capiana, a wealthy construction magnate. Upon arriving at the restaurant, SVT1 encountered a man he thought was the owner. This individual, whom he later described as an Italian man in his 50s, standing about 6 feet tall, weighing around 250 pounds, with a dark complexion and grey hair combed straight back, escorted SVT1 and his friend Ernest Insalmo to the main dining room. They noticed only 2 other occupied tables in the restaurant. Shortly after, a young couple entered and sat a few tables away. The man was of medium height, slight build, and wore a dark suit and tie, while his female companion was a flashy dresser with blonde hair, seemingly in her early 20s. The man SVT1 believed to be the restaurant owner joined the couple at their table, discreetly passing a wad of money to the man. The couple left shortly thereafter without ordering food or drinks. SVT1 found the scene suspicious, but didn't think much of it until he saw pictures of John F. Kennedy's accused assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, in the media following the assassination. Convinced that the man he saw at the restaurant was Oswald, SVT1 shared his belief with Glynn County Police Officer Johnny Harris 3 days after the assassination. When questioned about the owner of the Town and Country restaurant, SVT1 admitted he knew nothing about the man's background, associates, or activities. Unbeknownst to him, the restaurant was owned by the Marcello family, and the man he met was actually Joseph Pareto, the restaurant manager, and a high-ranking member of the Marcello criminal organization. SVT-1's lack of knowledge about Paretto's connections likely emboldened him to report what he had seen. Both Eugene Delapara and SVT-1 provided the FBI with different dates for their respective sightings of suspicious activities in New Orleans. Delapara believed his encounter occurred in March or April, while SVT-1 recalled his visit to the Town & Country Motel taking place in either March or April. It was in April 1963 that Lee Harvey Oswald left Dallas, where he had been living for 10 months, and returned to his native New Orleans. He departed Dallas on April 6th, and 6 days later, someone took a shot at Major General Edwin Walker in Dallas, a crime Marina Oswald later claimed was committed by her husband. Oswald moved to New Orleans around April 24th, the same day the White House announced President Kennedy's planned trip to Texas in November. Oswald stayed with his aunt and uncle, Charles and Lillian Murrett. Charles Murrett, known as Dutz, was a mid-level bookmaker in the Marcello gambling network, working under Sam Sire, reputed to be very close to Carlos Marcello. In early 1967, during New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison's reinvestigation of the Kennedy assassination, Eugene Delapara provided the FBI with more detailed information. He revealed that it was Tony Marcello, Carlos Marcello's brother, who hinted to Trigal about an impending assassination. Delapara also claimed that Trigal knew Lee Harvey Oswald and that Vincent Marcello frequently traveled to Dallas with David Ferrie, a pilot. As Garrison's investigation gained traction, Hoover's attention was diverted to other pressing matters, including allegations of CIA Mafia plots to assassinate Fidel Castro. These allegations, brought to light by journalist Drew Pearson, prompted President Lyndon Johnson to order a full investigation. The inquiry revealed that Johnny Roselli, an underworld figure hired by the CIA, had been involved in plotting Castro's murder. This investigation added another layer of intrigue to the already complex and murky circumstances surrounding President Kennedy's assassination.